Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining what I think actually might be the last webinar for in the Go for Growth 2025 series, the last public webinar that we're doing. So that is amazing. We have one that is for Solihull coming up and one which is for HE suppliers. But this out of our series of normal Go for Growth is our last one. So, and it's going to be a good one. So thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you, especially to Annalise. We've got a lot of people signed up today, so I'll just nip through housekeeping whilst people are coming in from the waiting room. So as always, we're on Zoom and we are recording the session today. A copy of both the recording and the slide deck that you see today in PDF format will be sent out afterwards. So everything that you see on the screen and all of the commentary that myself and Annalise give, you'll get after the event, hopefully within 48 hours, but certainly before the end of Thursday this week. So we will just do some introductions in a second, and then we'll have a look at where are we now with the Procurement Act as we come up to the end of 2025 calendar year. And then Annalise is going to take us through some lessons learned on evaluation, and we're going to have a quick look at common language as well, some of the terminology shifts under the Acts. And then we'll look at some reminders for things that are useful to keep in our mind's eye and what's coming next. We have carved out some time for questions, but because we're in Zoom, if you've got a question as we go along, please feel free to pop it in the Q&A. The chat is enabled as well, so if you do want to say hello and introduce yourself, please don't feel you have to, but if you'd like to, that would be lovely. It's always nice to know who it is that's on a webinar with us. So hopefully that will all be useful information. As always, we're a 45-minute webinar, so we will be cantering through quite a lot. So if you do want to chat with either myself or Annalise afterwards, our contact details for both YPO and Go for Growth are in the slide deck. So please do feel free to come to us both with any more detailed questions. If we can't get through all the questions today, we will aim to answer them as we send out the slide deck and the recording. So please do feel free to pop anything in the chat or the Q&A as we go. So I'll do a quick introduction to me and to Go for Growth, and then I'll hand over to Annalise. So if you've been on a Go for Growth webinar before, you might know who I am, but my name is Gillian Askew, and I'm one of 3 co-founding directors of Go for Growth, and we are a social enterprise, a micro-social enterprise. So we're a business for good. So we are focused on impact. And the way that we try and create impact is in a number of ways. So supporting buyers to open up markets. Our job in procurement, and I've been in procurement for 30 years, is to inspire markets to access the whole of the market, to see what the talent is in the market and to be accessible to that whole market. So Go for Growth supports buyers to do just that. We also help suppliers to grow and compete in public sector opportunities. We also look at other funding types, so lottery funding, charitable donation funding, through things like foundations that might be attached to corporate organisations. We also support grant funding applications. And we do support private sector opportunities as well, but principally we're focused on public sector procurement opportunities. And all of that is really about building diversity into supply chains and helping especially smaller organisations build that resilience that we need. And we'll talk a bit about resilience a bit later. And to do that, we need to have transparency, the processes need to be inclusive, and of course, the emerging agenda, and it's not a new agenda, on social value. So really thinking about the social and environmental impact that procurement can have underpins all that we do. And we're really focused on that local growth in local economic areas. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Go for Growth as a social enterprise is funded by the public sector organisations who work with us, including YPO, and that means that all the support that we can offer to the marketplace is delivered free of charge. So if you are a supplier on the call today and you want some help from Go for Growth, please don't feel like there's a cost barrier in there. There absolutely isn't. You can come to us. And here's just a snapshot of some of the organisations we either currently work with or have worked with over the last few years across the public sector. So a broad range across all different sectors, including health, blue light services, local authority, housing associations, central government, local government, etc., as well as mayoral combined authorities and some of the anchor institution networks as well. So we are working with a good cross-section across the public sector. Annalise.
Thank you. So my name's Annalise Fothergill. I'm a contract officer at YPO and I've been at YPO about 6 years now. And we make sure in the contracts team that all the procurements that we deliver at YPO are compliant. So YPO stands for the Yorkshire Purchasing Organisation. We're based in Wakefield and we were formed in 1974. We're one of the largest public sector buying organisations, especially for education. And whilst we are based in Wakefield, we do cover the whole of the UK and we have many frameworks in place to meet the whole of the public sector needs. So some of our customer base includes things like educational establishments, including schools, academies, colleges, universities, nurseries, childminders, our blue light service colleagues, including fire, ambulance and the police authority, charities and social enterprises, NHS trusts, local authorities, central government and ministerial departments as well. So we have over 30,000 customers and we have specialist procurement teams at YPO who specialise in certain subject areas and they're on hand to offer advice, support and guidance with calling off YPO frameworks, and we have a unique selling point that we can run your further competitions for you if needed. So we have over 23,000 products which we stock in our warehouse and can deliver to your organisation. And we also have in place over 100 frameworks. So whether it's pens or paper, furniture, electricity, food or insurance, we can help customers get the best deals around. So YPO is 100% publicly owned. We are self-funded and not for profit. So everything we do is about giving back to the public sector and providing effective solutions to public sector organisations. Last year, we did celebrate our 50th birthday. And since we started our dividend scheme back in 1992, we've returned over 164 million back to the public sector through member dividends that they can then spend on frontline services. So we are all about not-for-profit.
Brilliant. Thank you, Annalise. I'm always astounded by the numbers from YPO. I think there's some really great messages in there. So if we think about where we are now, so the Procurement Act officially went live on the 24th of February this year. As of the 3rd of November, which is when we pulled the data together, we've now got over 3,000 contracting authorities and over 54,000 suppliers registered on the central digital platform. That data comes directly from the Cabinet Office, the Transforming Public Procurement update on the central digital platform. And if you are unfamiliar with the central digital platform, if you're a supplier on the call, you might not be familiar with it yet. It is the new home for all procurement data. It is often the language is interchangeable between the Find a Tender service and central digital platform. They are the same thing. So if you hear anyone talking about FTS or Find a Tender service or the central digital platform, they are the same platform. And in essence, it's a single central location for both buyer and supplier registration. All the notice publications are on the central digital platform and all the reporting is on there as well. There is now a new supplier search tool that's just launched, so that will allow buyers to look up registered suppliers, and there is some discussion around expansion of that, so the commercial tools will be on there, and in the future suppliers will also be able to look into more detail around what work has been awarded, who runs the framework, who's on the framework, what's going through that framework, etc., etc. So the data element of the central digital platform is only set to expand in the future. That supplier search tool that I just talked about will naturally increase visibility and transparency, pipeline management, market engagement, all of that kind of stuff. And it's worth noting that at the moment, it is mandatory to register to the central digital platform if you want to interact with above threshold opportunities. You can still use the Find a Tender service as a search engine, but if you do want to interact with those opportunities, you will need to register on the supplier information system. It is recommended at this point that you would register even if you're looking at below threshold procurements. at some point in the future, the Cabinet Office are planning to close that data gap in the future. So it does make sense to get that registration done. I will pop a link out with the slides. So if you haven't gone through that supplier registration yet and completed the supplier information system, we have put together a tutorial video just to show you how to do that. So I'll send that out as well. The current Transforming Public Procurement programme is scheduled to conclude in spring 2026. After that, a new legacy procurement capability programme will take over, and that will all be about building long-term learning and long-term capability across the public sector. So as we move towards 2026, that focus is turning into thinking about capability and embedding consistent standards across the whole system. So that legacy procurement capability programme will launch in phases from March 2026, with practitioner and expert level content to follow later that year, focusing on skills like designing competitions, evaluating effectively, and delivering social value. And I think it's an important transition, actually. So moving to maturity, so seeing procurement as a professional discipline and not just a process, that professionalisation of procurement is really important and is being underpinned by the maturity programme within that Transforming Public Procurement agenda. So what's changed so far? For buyers, you will have seen a shift towards flexibility and proportionality. So the principles that underpin certainly the competitive flexible procedure are about being able to design procedures that actually suit the project, the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, rather than a default to templates that often created conflict or constraint or rigidity in the process. For suppliers, and it's an interesting one for Go for Growth, the design of it around transparency and access are all about creating better access, more one-stop shop accessibility, and far more transparency. The transparency regime went from 5 notices to something like 15 notices. And that's all designed to help suppliers see that whole procurement life cycle in one place. So that central digital platform is a particularly useful tool in terms of that. And with the expansion of it in the future, that will only grow in usefulness, I think, to the supplier market. According to the Cabinet Office Super Newser, should I say, the 2025 edition, there are over 12,500 people in the Communities of Practice Learning Network, where procurement org people come together, commissioners, contract managers, etc., across the whole spectrum of procurement life cycle in this learning network. And it's a real sign of some momentum, I think, in this professionalisation of procurement as we move through the Act. I don't know if everyone is on the call. Actually, I talked about it at, so I attended the Adult Social Care Commissioners Conference with YPO a couple of weeks ago. And one of the things we talked about was the recent Cabinet Office consultation. So the consultation launched in June 2025. It closed in September, and it was called Public Procurement Growing British Industry, Jobs and Skills. And it effectively was seeking views from the procurement community on how 380 odd billion pounds of public spend can be used more strategically to boost the UK economy. Whilst you can't answer the survey any longer, you can still go to the Smart Survey and see the questions that were asked in there, so you can get a view of what happened. But it's worth, I think, saying that it marks a clear pivot from implementation of the regulations to using it as this lever for economic growth, resilience and skills. And it covers the areas that you can see on the screen. So focusing on economic growth, as well as looking at local employment and skills. And I think that underpins the reality that true national growth will only come if we have thriving local communities. And that relies on access to good jobs, as well as the appropriate training. If you look at mayoral combined authorities, growth hubs, local authorities, most public sector organisations in their social value will have focuses on reducing the number of young people who are not in education, employment or training as a key objective to part of building a thriving and sustainable local economic area. And we know from the pandemic that supplier resilience is crucial. One of the things we did see in the pandemic, in many ways, is that smaller organisations have the ability to pivot quickly when needed. So that focus on supplier resilience underpinned by accessibility and inclusivity for micro, sole traders, small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as the voluntary sector, so voluntary community and social enterprises, is really important to underpin and pull up all of that sort of growth ambition that we have. And how will that sort of all materialise in procurement itself? So we are using procurement to drive economic growth and industrial growth right across the UK. We are using procurement to strengthen supplier resilience and encourage innovation across supply chains, to build local employment, to develop skills into contracts, support and open access to small to medium enterprises and VCSE to encourage greater participation. And it's interesting with PPN 001, with the requirement for central government and the encouragement for wider public sector to measure the spend direct to SMEs and VCSEs, I think is really interesting, especially when you break down what a SME looks like into micro, sole trader, small and medium-sized enterprises and where that work is going. And all of that is around balancing, I guess, cost efficiency with the longer term social and economic value. This is Annalise's phrase. Actually, I can't take any credit for most of this, actually, not just this next phrase, but procurement is being reframed as an economic engine, not just a compliance mechanism. And I think it's such an important statement for us all to take on board, whether we're suppliers or buyers in procurement, that procurement has an awful lot to offer in terms of economic development. It is not just a policing or compliance mechanism. So those processes and that innovation and outcome-based focus is really great. So for buyers, what that means is evaluation criteria, key performance indicators. They are in the thick of an evolution. We'll see more focus on how contracts contribute to jobs, to skills, to local economic development. And for suppliers, it will be about showing that value. So evidencing not just our ability to deliver the core goods and services of the contract, but how we strengthen the communities and the markets that we work in. And that direction aligns with what we've started to see in those, the first few months of the Act. So transparency, accountability, and data-driven, evidence-based intelligence that underpins decision-making in procurement. And so in real terms, that might mean a buyer might introduce a question in evaluation, such as describe how your approach will create training or employment opportunities in the contract area. And a supplier could respond with tangible plans that are backed up with infrastructure-based evidence around apprenticeships, school outreach, partnerships locally, or targeted recruitment. And there is an expectation that the Cabinet Office will reflect these kind of approaches in future updates to the National Procurement Policy Statement next year. With YPO, again, we delivered a social value and procurement workshop last week. And I'm always minded that there are lots of documents that we could encourage suppliers to read and ingest. But the National Procurement Policy Statement is up at the top of the list for me in terms of a really useful and helpful document that, whether you're a buyer or a supplier, it will give you that understanding of what's important and what we're trying to achieve through the regulations. So have a look out for those changes to the National Procurement Policy Statement next year in 2026. Annalise, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. So at YPO, we have issued a number of procurements under the Procurement Act 2023, and these are just our findings to date with the process and what's happening in evaluation. So we've had central digital platform information that suppliers have inputted that's not matching publicly available registers. Now, this is leading to delays in evaluation and award. So there are obligations for contracting authorities to check and verify the self-declared information submitted by suppliers. So, for example, we've recently evaluated a tender where we've had incorrect connected persons information not matching persons of significant control listed at Companies House, or it could be that the registered address is not matching Companies House, which all require clarification. So a connected person is a person or organisation with significant control, which might be a parent company or a director. So you need to declare these people as connected persons. Also, don't forget that connected persons also include predecessor companies, for example, companies that might have become insolvent or ceased to trade, and the business has effectively been transferred to another supplier which shares at least one other director or shadow director with a previous supplier. These are also considered connected persons. So it's not just who your persons of significant control is at Companies House. You need to be thinking wider. We've also had suppliers not recognising who is an associated person or declaring subcontracting arrangements and therefore not answering the questions correctly, which again is leading to lots of clarifications needed. So an associated person is a supplier that you are relying upon in order to satisfy the condition of participation. So this could be anything other than a financial guarantor. So, for example, if you are a reseller of gas cookers and hobs and you're bidding for a contract for the supply of fitting of gas cookers and hobs in commercial kitchen, and the contracting authority has set out a condition of participation to include organisational standards such as ISO certification or for you to be gas safe registered. It might well be that you have the ISO certification, so that's not a problem. But as a reseller, you might subcontract the fitting of the appliances through to a third party, ABC Gas Supplies Limited, who do have the gas safe registered certification. So in this case, or in this example, ABC Gas Supplies would be your associated supplier because you are relying upon them to satisfy that gas safe registration. So you need to be thinking about associated persons. They are likely to be in your first tier of subcontractors, but maybe further down your supply chain, especially when you're thinking of highly technical elements. So intended subcontractors are not only subcontractors that you are relying upon to meet a condition of participation, but also extends to subcontractors of all tiers. So going back to the example, because you are a reseller of the gas ovens and hobs, you will be buying them from a manufacturer. That manufacturer is in your supply chain, so you need to be declaring them as part of your subcontracting arrangement. It might well be for the delivery of the gas hobs and ovens that you use DPD and Royal Mail to deliver them to the customer prior to them being fitted, in which case DPD and Royal Mail will be one of your subcontractors. And you need to declare all subcontractor information of all tiers in your tender submission. That's irrelevant of whether you're a reseller or not. And as well, if you change subcontractors or associated persons, when that contract or framework is live, you still need to declare those new subcontractor or associated persons information during that live framework so that the contracting authority can do the necessary due diligence information on them. So we would recommend that if you are a buying organisation that you build into your contract management questions, a question to ask suppliers if they've changed any of their subcontractors or associated persons so that you're making sure we have got factually and incorrect information. One of the other issues that we're finding is timescales. So because it's a new procedure, evaluations are taking longer than we anticipated. So it is leading to delays. We are also having to take really good evaluation notes and moderation notes to produce those assessment summaries, which is all adding to the longer time scales. You also need to be aware that if you want to raise a challenge, there is a 30-day limitation period. So the 30 days starts from when you knew or ought to have known there's been a breach of the Act. So you can't wait for the conclusion of the outcome of the award to bring the challenge. If you think there is a fundamental issue with the procurement or something's not clear, you need to be flagging it to the contracting authority straight away. Likewise with standstill periods, when you're calculating your 8 working days, this needs to include all UK public holidays. And this includes public holidays that are in Scotland and Northern Ireland that might be different from England. So on the 30th of November, there's a bank holiday in Scotland for St Andrew's Day. And this bank holiday, even though it doesn't apply to England, Wales and Northern Ireland, still needs to be taken into consideration when you're calculating your 8 working days. So the standstill period will start from the issuing of the contract award notice, and it means that nobody can enter into a contract until the expiry of that standstill period. It can be longer than 8 working days if you want, but if you do want to bring a challenge, it needs to be brought within those 8 working day period or however long that standstill period is. So if we move on to the next slide, we're all getting used to the new terminology under the Procurement Act 2023. And I think it's fair to say that if you are a buyer, you're having to refer to the Act quite a number of times to look at definitions and what have you. And it will be exactly the same if you are a supplier trying to understand the new terminology. So let's just go through a few of the new terminologies that you might find to hopefully bring it to life to help you understand it a little bit better. So we've got new terminology around award without competition, which is the award of a call of contract without reopening competition. So this is similar to a direct award under the previous procurement regulations. We've also got new terminology of competitive selection process, which means the award of a call of contract by reopening competition between suppliers appointed to the relevant lot on the framework agreement. And this is similar to the further competition under the previous set of regulations. We also now have an objective mechanism, which is the objective mechanism for supplier selection to be used when making an award without competition, thinking about the old direct award system. And this should include all the core terms of the call of contract, which should be used when it is awarded. Examples of objective mechanisms include maybe awarding to the top ranked provider. It could be 100% on cost, so it might be to the cheapest provider for your requirements, or it could be a taxi rank system where you award it to the next supplier on the list. The objective mechanisms for each procurement will differ and should be clearly set out in the tender documents and tender notice. We also have the assessment summaries. Now, these replace the old award letters, and these contain information about your assessed tender, including the scores given and the reasons why you've been given that score. If you have not been successful in a procurement, there will also be provided the same information for the lowest ranking awarded supplier to a framework, or if it is a contract, the winning supplier's assessment summary. So you should be able to see clearly why somebody has been awarded a contract over yourselves. We've also got new terminology of associated persons and connected persons, which we've just been through. And we've also got excludable supplier. Now, excludable suppliers are linked to discretionary exclusion grounds, for example, performance. Now, if a buyer believes that a discretionary exclusion grounds apply or continue or are likely to continue, then a supplier may be disregarded from the tender process. It could also be that the supplier is on the debarment list for such exclusion grounds as well, and in which case they need to be excluded from the process. We've also got excluded supplier, which is different from an excludable supplier. Excluded suppliers are linked to the mandatory exclusion grounds, and these are the most serious offences such as fraud, bribery, cartel activities, or national security threats. And this exclusion is usually mandatory. So if you do feel that some exclusion grounds apply, if you are a supplier, you need to give as much information as possible to the contracting authority for them to determine if your organisation may be excluded or excludable. The contracting authority should consider the evidence of your self-cleaning and if there's a public overriding interest before excluding a supplier. It's not something that they take very lightly. They usually have lots of discussions and they need to see evidence before they do exclude a supplier. So the conditions of participation, which we've just touched upon on the previous slide, these should relate to the legal, financial and technical ability to perform the contract. So again, these are also linked to associated persons as well. Under the new Act, we've got new notices which need to be published, such as the contract award notice, which will now start at standstill rather than the award letters under the previous regime. We've also got new contract details notice, where a contracting authority is required to publish a copy of a signed contract if over 5 million, and payment compliance notices, to name but a few, which will need publishing from next year. So there's lots of new things still being introduced under the new Act, including new notices, which will come into effect next year.
Annalise, just before we move on, we have got one thing in the chat, and I apologise to the person who put the question in the chat. I'm not sure quite what was being said at the time, but the statement is, this will still be the responsibility of the primary supplier, I assume, and they manage the supply chain for the client. So the answer largely, I think, Annalise, to that is yes. It is the responsibility of the primary supplier to manage the supply chain that sits underneath. Yeah.
100%, but you still need to declare any subcontracting arrangement.
And I think from my experience in procurement, although the contractual relationship will be with that primary supplier, for things like payments, for example, we do have a responsibility to make sure that the payment is being flowed through the supply chain in a timely and effective manner. So we do have responsibility at the top of the family tree in procurement as the contracting authority to make sure that those processes are in place where appropriate as well. But fundamentally, the management is through that primary supplier.
100%, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully that answers the question. Thanks, Annalise.
Thank you. So let's move on to reminders and what is next. So the aim of the Procurement Act is to encourage contracting authorities to speak with the market before commencing a procurement, usually through the issuing of a preliminary market engagement notice. And the purposes of engagement could be for you to set out what your requirements are likely to be and to try and work out what the best approach to the procurement may be. You can use this opportunity as well to help work with your suppliers to design a procedure, to look at what the conditions of participation may be. So making sure we're setting appropriate insurance limits for the industry that or the sector that you are buying for, and also looking at appropriate award criteria. And this could include social value as well. You can also identify at this point what suppliers they are in the market. Is there new suppliers that you're not aware of? What goods are they able to supply? Can everyone supply what you're asking? Or do you need to kind of work with the market to develop their capacity to be able to deliver the goods and services that you require? Preliminary market engagement is also used or should be used to look at contractual terms. Is there any special contractual terms for what you are buying? So we know for IT services, there's often an end user license agreement when we're buying licenses for IT products, for example, that need to be factored into the T's and C's. So again, with the competitive flexible procedure, this allows contracting authorities to design a procedure that is commercially optimal for both the contracting authority and the supplier, and it should be scalable and proportionate. So if you're running a I don't know, £200,000, no, that's probably not, £2 million contract. If you're asking for a whole heap of requirements which are not proportionate to what you're asking for, then you shouldn't be using a competitive flexible procedure. You need to be proportionate with the requirements that you are setting. So again, under the new Procurement Act, we've got now more notices that we need to publish in relation to contract management, termination notices of um, for frameworks and contracts, performance notices. So there is more requirements and more evidence needed for things like prompt payment of suppliers and subcontractors and supply chains. So there's a lot more transparency in the new Procurement Act and a lot more obligations for contracting authorities to issue notices throughout the life of the contract, not just for the procurement, but for the KPIs, for example. And hot off the press, we now have new threshold amounts from the 1st of January 2026. And these have just recently been published. Now, the new figures are similar to what we currently have, um, but um, for most procurements, there is a slight reduction in the threshold amounts except for light touch regime where there is no change. So we would highly recommend that you look at the new procurement threshold amounts, which will take place from the 1st of January 2026, and factor these into your procurements that you have planned. When you are calculating your threshold amounts, you need to include VAT and calculate the cost of the total value of your contract, including any extension periods. So this could be if your contract runs for 10 years and you've got an initial 5 years plus another 5-year extension period, you need to consider the value of the contract for the whole of that 10-year period. So as I say, there is a slight reduction in most threshold amounts except for light touch regime, which stays the same, which will mean that more contracts are subject to the full procurement rules from the 1st of January 2026. So as we look to develop and to build on the Procurement Act, it will hopefully be embedded as business as usual by April, June onwards, 2026, with the main focus now switching on to new tools and provisions in the central digital platform for supplier identification improvements. There'll be more analytics hopefully developed for that central digital platform to help benchmark yourselves as suppliers and contracting authorities. We know there's going to be a launch of the Register of Commercial Tools any day now that sets out all the frameworks and DPS solutions that anybody could potentially purchase through. And then we also know that by October 2026, they are in the process of turning off Contracts Finder and moving that over onto the central digital platform. So if you still need to issue notices on Contracts Finder through legacy PCR frameworks that you are calling off, instead of issuing the notice on Contracts Finder from October 2026, it's anticipated that you will be putting that notice through the central digital platform rather than through Contracts Finder. So that's one to watch out for as we get nearer that time limit.
Brilliant. Thanks, Annalise. And so does that, I think that means then, so Contracts Finder is a really useful search engine for below threshold opportunities. That means then that providers will only have one place to search for all opportunities regardless of value. Okay, brilliant. That is good news, I think, having everything in one place for sure. Um, What we know is whether you're in procurement or if you're a provider or you're aspiring to provide your goods and services to the public sector, it can feel like a bit of a minefield at the moment. The good news is we're all in the same boat. We're all learning about the new regulations, but help is on hand. So there is the YPO website there. There's lots of really useful information on the YPO website. Similarly with Go for Growth, you can get in touch with either of us. We have an open calendar in Go for Growth that you can book a one-to-one via Teams through. What we've also got in Go for Growth is the Public Sector Supply Ready accreditation, which if you're a provider, it could be really useful to help you see if you've got the tools in your toolkit that you might need for most general public sector opportunities, especially above threshold. So that could be really useful. Again, all of those things are free of charge. And there is a live link in here, a short course on the Procurement Act, again, designed for the supply network, but could be useful as well if you're in procurement to have a look at it. So please feel free to have a look at all of those things. And I think that's it from us, where we will open up to questions. We've got a few minutes left in the session. If anyone's got any questions, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll just see if there's anything in the chat. I'm just getting some sunlight, so I'm looking a little bit evangelical at the moment with the sunlight coming through the window, so apologies. There's nothing in the chat or the Q&A at the moment. If you do find you've got a question, please do get in touch with either YPO or Go for Growth. We are here to help both of us. So please do get in touch if you've got anything that you later think about. The slides and the recording will come out. And really thank you ever so much for everyone who's joined, for taking time out of what I know are busy calendars to come and chat with us this morning. My biggest thanks is to you, Annalise. Thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is a really challenging calendar at the moment. Your support to the marketplace, especially, is really useful. I am just seeing a couple of things in the chat. So there are planned meetings on the 2026 on the Procurement Act. Yes, we have got one. It's live on our Eventbrite at the moment. As we go through that first anniversary in February, so it's about a week after it first went live, we will have a look. The agenda's quite loose at the moment because we'll tie it down when we get nearer to the time. But yes, we've got more coming up. We'll keep these Procurement Act sessions, I think, going certainly throughout the next 12 months, if not longer, because we are changing. As Annalisa said, there's just more coming. We'll transition from transforming public procurement to business as usual. So it will keep going. And whilst ever there are changes in the Act, we'll keep trying to be helpful in terms of how you navigate it, both as procurement and supply. Is there a summary table that shows the thresholds and corresponding notices that buyers are required to publish? Yes, there is. We'll pop a link to the thresholds in with the slide deck. And there is a notice regime that we've got on a slide, Annalise, I think, that shows all of the notices and the sections of the Act as well. So I'll pop a note to put both of those things in the slide deck as they go. So we'll make sure that they come out as well. If there isn't anything else, thank you ever so much for your time and attention this morning. We hope you found that useful. Anything else from you, Annalise, before we close?
I can see in the participants that Hazel's got a hand up. I don't know if she wants to
Right, okay.
come in and say anything. The attendees.
Let me just Hazel. Right. So Hazel, you should be able to, if you unmute yourself now, you should be able to chat if you wanted to, Hazel. If you've popped your hand up in error, don't worry. You can always ask us a question outside of this, but so it might be a hand up in error. We get those from time to time, don't we? If there's nothing else, we'll close the session today. Thank you again to everyone. Thank you so much, Annalise. I'm sure you and I will get together on future ones in 2026 for certain.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.